Yay, brilliant. Well, hello everybody out there in the internet land. How are you? I hope you're well. And if you are joining us live, you're so welcome to be here. Thank you very much for joining us. And please do follow along. And if you've got any comments or questions as we chat, please pop them into the comments below. And I will do our best to make sure we get to those. Oh, look, there we go. Let me mute me. And if you are joining us afterwards, if you're watching the recording, you are also welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And likewise, do pop some comments in and we will get back to you as soon as we can. It's lovely to have you here. Carol, welcome. Good to see you. I've got to do my YouTube thing. Hit the subscribe button, do the bell, all the thing, you know what to do. And so you don't miss out on any more videos that are coming your way. And I have some good stuff coming your way, so you don't want to miss that. But welcome everybody. So today I've even got some balloons. We're here to celebrate the launch of Launchpad, the countdown to writing your book. I'm absolutely delighted and absolutely thrilled to have been part of this with you. I want to say thank you to everybody for investing in this project and being part of it. It's been an amazing journey for me personally, and I hope it's been fun and it will be productive for you guys too. And you also know that you have been able to be part of helping others kind of get their feet under the table and get writing and get their books finished and out into the world. So thank you everybody for being here. I thought it would be really useful for us just to do a little round robin, so people who are new to you can get a feel for who you are and what you write. And I'm just going to go through my screen segment. So Joe, you're at my top left. I wonder if we could start with you, what you do and what you write as well.
Yeah, I am an author. I wrote a book called Crowdsourcing Paris, a memoir about living in Paris. And I also teach writing at my site called The Write Practice, WRITE practice, thewritepractice.com. And I wrote a chapter on scene structure and how to use structure to write great scenes.
Yeah, totally. I love that about your the name of your company, and that is one of the things that you do repeat. You've got to practice. Writing is a practice. You've got to practice.
Right. Yeah, it's so important because we sometimes try to make it about writing the big masterpiece before we have maybe the skills or the experience to do that. And sometimes you write your best writing when you're just focusing on doing the work. So,
yeah, totally. Meredith, my love, you are next on my screen. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Meredith R. Stoddart. I write a contemporary fantasy series that blends Scottish and Appalachian folklore with modern life. And you would think that being a fantasy writer, I would not necessarily need to research because I can just invent things, but that's not the way I write fantasy. It's very grounded in sort of the contemporary world. So I do a lot of research, and that is the chapter that I've written for this book, is all about research and taking advantage of the tools that we have on the internet and all the things that you probably need to know to write fiction.
Yeah, no, it's a super chapter, and I love one of your anecdotes as well about when you were in Scotland. Exactly where to go.
Yes, it's amazing. Google Street View is an incredible tool. I knew my way around Ullapool without ever having been there before.
And Susanne, welcome to you. Lovely to have you here.
I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and I'm sorry if you hear my birds chirping in the background. I don't know how noisy they're going to be. But anyway, I write historical fiction. I have over a dozen published novels, and I think that Meredith and I could have swapped subjects for our chapters easily because I wrote the world building chapter. So I do a lot of research, but I also am a big into really creating that world where your story lives, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, or even some contemporary set in a place that's unfamiliar. Grounding your reader in the setting is a huge thing for getting them involved in your book. So I'm happy to be here. I'm also an Author Accelerator certified book coach, and I coach fiction and nonfiction.
Hey, lovely to have you here. Yes, I mean, I write contemporary fiction, but undoubtedly there is always research to be done. And even though I live in Scotland, I'm from Scotland, and my stories are set in Scotland, I still need to do research to set the tone and the feel of the play. So it's a vital part of it. So thank you. Heather, welcome. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. So I am also an Author Accelerator certified book coach, and I'm the founder of the Creative Authorpreneur. And I both write and coach speculative fiction and also any stories that are diversity focused. So if the protagonist is from an underrepresented community, that's what I specialize in. And I wrote the chapter on how to use both show and tell techniques to deepen your story to really engage your readers.
Oh, such an important chapter, I think, because show and tell is one of those phrases that gets bandied around and people use it very liberally, but not really knowing what it is or how to use it. So when I interviewed you a while ago about this topic, I knew this was perfect for the book. And so I'm so glad you said yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Great to see everyone here. I am just completely proud to be part of this wonderful group and this wonderful series. Congratulations to everyone, and can't wait to help writers and out there with the amazing work that's on the pages of Launchpad. So by way of introduction, I'm Carol Hende. I'm an entrepreneurial, purpose-driven leader, and that plays out in multiple ways. I have a mission to really help inspire hope and empathy for people and planet. And I do that as an author, as a speaker. Also, I started a publishing company that is registered as a B Corp or a benefits corporation. And I have a day job in corporate America in which I'm a strategist, a marketer, and a digital leader, as well as serving on boards. I was incredibly proud to write a chapter on point of view. I think it's such a foundational decision that authors need to make when it comes to what point of view they're going to use in their books. I'm really looking forward to discussing that. And it's something I myself have faced as I've written my books. So I'm the author of Orchid Blooming and Goodbye Orchid, in which this uses third person point of view. And I'm sure we're going to get into that. I also love the research thread that everyone's talking about, because certainly research has been important in my work. My work's inspired by combat wounded veterans and has an incredible amount of research in it. So thanks for inviting all of us.
Yay, no, pleasure. It's great to get to know you. Welcome. Linda, how are you? Welcome.
I am doing great, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I really can't wait to read everybody's chapters. And they sound so terrific. I am Linda Rosen, the author of Disharmony of Silence and Sisters of the Vine, and my next book, my third, which keeps blowing me away that we'll have three, The Emerald Necklace, is coming out in May. And I wrote the chapter on critique groups, how to find one, how to participate, all the good, the bad, and the ugly about them. Because honestly, when I started writing, I got into a critique group before I even knew what craft meant, what point of view meant. I had no idea. I was learning it through my critique groups. And there's so much out there, pros and cons, and how people feel about them. So I hope my chapter helps. And I do have one exciting thing to say that brought this chapter. I'm going to be a speaker at the Women Fiction Writers Association conference in October on this chapter, but it's going to be all about Launchpad. With that.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on being part of the Women's Fiction Conference. That is so exciting. And thank you too for doing your chapter on critique groups, because I think we hear a lot about community, and it is so vital to our, not just our learning, but staying in writing as well, sticking with the writing, so that we don't give up and we see what other people are going through and understand, oh, okay, it's not just me, everyone's going through this at some stage. So that's always good to have. So thank you, Linda. Thank you. Stephanie, where would we be without you? My goodness, get yourself off mute.
I am so excited to be here. I feel a little bit like a fangirl, because you all don't realize how much I've been reading you and following your stories and like kind of stalking your web pages and learning more about you. And you're all here. I'm kind of like Ooh, I'm in the room with them. I'm so excited. I have.
Yeah, Stephanie, what's your role in this? It's got Red Penguin Books.
I am the publisher of this book, and I am so excited to be here and to be part of such a great project. Grace Salmon had brought this idea of a book to me, gosh, many moons ago. And I don't know that I've ever said yes as a publisher to a book faster, because and for incredibly selfish reasons. I mean, it sounded like a wonderful book, but as a publisher, we're a small press independent publisher. We publish about 100, 120 books a year, all genres. And as a publisher, I get, of course, people from all ranges. I wrote a book. I want to write a book. How do I write a book? What do I do? I want to get all these different people. And I desperately wanted to have something that I could recommend. And I was getting a little tired of saying, oh, I mean, Stephen King wrote something on writing. And I mean, it's very good with all due respect. But when Grace brought this to me, I said, this is what I need. I need a cornerstone book that is going to be like in a stack on my desk when people say, how do I write a book? And I say, here it is. And the more she spoke about it, and the more I got to meet all of you behind the scenes and read your own books and all of your chapters, I realized this is absolutely that book. So Linda, I'm so excited you have a speech coming up. I have about 5 different workshops coming up on writing books, that your book is going to be the one that we're talking about and workshopping on and selling. And I'm so excited to be promoting such amazing, talented writers. And I'm thrilled to hear about all the further opportunities that each of you have. Some of you do book coaching or the writer's practice and all different things, so that I can send those writers who want to be published by Red Penguin Books someplace to get all their act together first. And so I'm delighted to be here, just overwhelmed at so much talent on one screen. And I can't wait to spend the next, at least the next 6 months is already scheduled for me, and beyond.
Yeah, you can't get rid of us now.
I can't get rid of you. I'm telling you, that's why I said this is not just a book for us. We publish a lot of books, and I'm very, very proud of all the books we publish. But this one is actually the book that I'm going to carry with me to all of those workshops and Zooms and everything else, because every single day people ask me, how do I write a book? What do I need to know? Or they send me a manuscript and the point of view changes and they didn't realize they did it by accident. You know that thing when all of a sudden the second half of the book is in third person and the first half was in first person. You know that problem. Or people come to me and say, I'm supposed to show, not tell. And I'm going to say, let's talk about that. Or, anyone who wants to write about historical fiction or anything else. And I could tell that they did not do their research.
Yes.
So I learned so much about a million things publishing this book, and I am so excited to spread the word. So Emma, thank you for arranging this morning, but thank you to all of you for sharing your talent. And Red Penguin Books is beyond proud to publish.
Well, I think Grace and I would probably echo that thanks to everybody for being part of it, how proud we are of it too. But of course, none of it would have come to pass had it not been for Grace's mind beavering away with lots of ideas going on. So Grace, what prompted you to want to put this book series together, not just on writing, but on publishing and marketing as well?
Well, Emma, I want to thank you for doing this this afternoon in Scotland and wherever else everybody is across the globe. But thanks to each and every person here. And I have to thank Stephanie in a particular way as well. This idea for this series came out of the fact that in March of 2022, so just a year ago, Mary Helen Sheriff had decided that she was going to launch a marketing business. I already had a radio show, and I thought, well, maybe we could help authors launch their books through Mary's marketing. And I realized that even though I have written 4 books, 5 if we count today's launch, I knew a lot about writing nonfiction
But when I published my novel, I did not know a lot. It was a totally different world. My nonfiction books were juried by university professors and teachers unions, and a totally different publishing process. So I started playing with this idea of how do we begin to uplift authors who have this huge learning curve so they can take off with their entire process quickly and hit the ground running in a way that I did not. So very quickly, Mary agreed to do the radio show and the marketing with me. And, you know, Stephanie, you say that it was many moons ago. I actually went to Emma on June 5th of last year and said, hey, Emma, do you want to do this book? I have this idea. The name of my radio show was Launchpad. And I have this idea to do Launchpad, the countdown to writing, the countdown to publishing, and the countdown to marketing. I'd love you because of your book coaching business to help me do this. She was in, I contacted her on June 5th. She said yes on June 12th. And we had a contract in hand from Stephanie, unprecedented, June 27th. So if you look at this idea that I had and others supported me in, to go from idea of maybe a radio show and some marketing in March, to what about a whole book series, to having a signed contract 8 months later, we have a book that I could not be more proud of. I learned so much in every single chapter. And I tease Stacy Jubal all the time because I was like, oh God, Emma asked somebody to do something on punctuation. And I was just like riveted. I learned so much from every single chapter. And, you know, it helps in so many ways. I'm teaching a course on writing right now. And I've mentioned every single one of your chapters to this course on writing, and shared the links to the countdown, which I think are so clever. You know, I'd love to, yes, I thought of them, but you can have a great idea, but until you see it, you go, wow, each of these 13 authors put down a great countdown. So I was inspired to do this because of a need that I saw in authors, but I'm even more inspired because of what each of you has shared. So thank you again. And Stephanie, thank you for trusting this idea and making it happen.
Yes.
My pleasure. I told you, Grace, the fastest yes I've ever said. I was absolutely blown away by the thought, the proposal, the names, and now to actually meet all of those people that were invited onto this project is beyond exciting. And as I said, I just can't wait to walk into every one of those workshops I've got planned and so many more and say, hey, this is your guide, the Launchpad guide to writing your book. And I'm so thrilled. Thanks, Grace.
Well, let's delve into that book and a few of the chapters that are represented here today. Meredith, I thought it would be great to start with you because your chapter is about research and the tools that you can use to research and write your book. I loved this chapter. It's such a great skill set that you've got, and I did learn a lot. I honestly did. So I wondered, how did you learn these skills? Was it just trial and error, or are you a secret librarian?
I'm not. I'm just really nerdy about knowing stuff. So, you know, I think every book idea for most writers I know starts with a kind of what if question. And my what if questions usually take me to Google or you know, a book about what I'm thinking of. And I just like to dive in and learn everything I possibly can about those things. I'm kind of a skill collector and a knowledge collector. I'm just love to learn about that stuff. And so I started, you know, because I write about folklore and I study folklore at university, I started with a good kind of library of things. But it also, folklore is an evolving medium and an evolving topic that changes every day. And the internet itself is kind of a, you know, spews out folklore hourly. And so it's important to kind of stay in with those and stay up to date with a lot of how people are thinking about it. So I end up doing a lot of research and stuff like that. But I also, you know, when you're writing a book, you want to know, and you want to give it credibility, to give it that verisimilitude, you want to know as much as you can about whatever you're writing about. So if it's a setting or a character or what their accents are, sound like, or things like that. You want to investigate all of that. And we are in a great time for research because we kind of have it all at our fingertips. But you have to be, as I said in the chapter, you have to be careful because there's also a lot of misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. So being media savvy and being smart about where you're searching and what your source material is important. And I think everybody has to keep that in mind as they're researching their books.
Yeah, definitely. And you give us some good tips on how to verify our sources and where we're getting that information, and some really good websites I'd never heard of, but are now, saved in my favorites so that I can refer to them. So that was great. And I wonder, as you're doing your research, and especially as you write in such a fun area with myths and folklore, do you get your ideas for your stories as well as you are writing? Does one feed into the other?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have to keep a notebook off to the side to be like, I'm looking up like Appalachian folklore, and I'll come across a particular tradition or a particular story and think, oh, that would be a great short story or a great book, and I'll kind of jot it down in my little idea book and maybe come back to it later. And that's another way to avoid that rabbit hole, because it would be very easy to just kind of chase every little thing that you find. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing to kind of keep that aside. But it's just, it's fascinating and easy to get lost.
Yeah. Oh, I can well imagine. And Susanne, I wonder if you find yourself down rabbit holes as well as you're kind of building your the worlds that you write in, and if it's easy to get very fixated on, I don't know, especially if you're doing historical, certain elements of clothing or makeup or household appliances, that kind of thing.
Well, I honestly have trained myself not to get too stuck down the rabbit holes, as I'm sure Meredith has done in our own ways, because my thought, especially when it comes to world building, is that there are certain limits around it that you need to put if you're ever going to be disciplined enough to get the words on the page, Mm-hmm. And I started from writing from my research as a graduate student in music history. So I had this backlog of stuff that I knew already. But as I progressed, I started writing about different things and I want to know about that. So let me start researching and getting some information about it. It is tempting to just keep going because there's so much great stuff out there, mm-hmm. so much. And what is magical to me when you research and you think you've got your story and you think, I just need her to do this, and I don't know whether and then you look it up and you go, oh, yes, she could do that because that really happened in the time. And it's a sort of a research serendipity is what I'd call it. But the limits, but forcing yourself not to get stuck down the rabbit hole is a key if you're ever going to get those words on the page.
Mm-hmm. Next, so your chapter is great, and you talk about there's sort of 3 basic principles for world building, which I think is great. I love having these boundaries that from which we can jump and leapfrog off of. So I wonder if you could kind of talk to us just a little bit about what those 3 principles are.
Sure. This is my personal principles that I use, so they're not anything that's set in stone. But the first is to be really physical, to actually try to be in your world. And this applies to historical fiction. It applies to speculative science fiction or fantasy. Is you have to enter into that world and really understand what your reader needs to know in order to feel that they're in that world. And there's a difference between the invented worlds and the researched worlds. Mm-hmm. And then the next one I say is go from the outside in, which sounds counterintuitive, but everything that happens in your world everything your characters do has to relate to the world you've created. So you're starting from the big picture and going in. And then my third one is taking that a little further and getting very specific. And by this, I don't mean to get lost in all the details. What I mean is that all of your character motivations and conflicts have to be specific to the worlds that you're creating and that in which they exist. Because you want your reader to really be in that world. And if the conflict is, he feels outside of it, or if the character is doing something that's outside of that world, it kind of grates and sends them, gets them sort of jolted out of the story, as it were. So those are my 3 principles in any case.
I think they're great, and they give us that real grounding for, and obviously in the chapter you go into more detail about how to use each of those principles, but they give us such a great grounding for the sort of baseline of the story and where we're starting from, a great starting place. And another area that we do want to have a good starting point, of course, is who is telling the story and which point of view they are telling the story for. So how are they viewing the world around them? And Carol, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sort of joining us on this, about how we can very cleverly use point of view to highlight the world that has been created and take advantage of showing the research that we've done, or demonstrating the key points that we need to pull out of a story.
Yeah, I love to say that point of view is both a strategic decision as well as a personal decision. And it's so useful to understand, what are the options that we have as writers, that we can choose a first person point of view. For instance, if we want that really deeply intimate portrait and to be able to speak in the first person I language, we see this a lot in YA and young adult fiction. We'll see a lot of this use of first person point of view. And then also you could choose a second person point of view. This one is a little more rare. This is when you use the you language. And this can be useful if you want to feel a real connection and create a real engagement and connection with the reader, because actually you're bringing the reader onto the page. The most common type of point of view is third person point of view. This is when you're speaking in he or she or they, and it allows this flexibility where you can actually therefore have multiple points of view, because as long as you're consistent. One of the areas that you brought up right at the beginning was this idea that sometimes, especially beginner writers, might make the mistake of head hopping from one person to another and changing point of view, not intentionally. But here with third person point of view, you can quite intentionally choose that a full chapter or a full scene is in one person's point of view. And so these choices, they can be strategic. Do you want to create that intimate first person? Do you want to bring the reader on the page with second person? Or do you want to have that multiple point of view with third person? But it also is personal, because I think it comes down to, what do you feel comfortable in? And as writers, it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to experiment. We can try. How does it feel? And I've actually done that in order to refresh my writing, to refresh my thinking about the plot and about how I'm crafting the characters, to write the same scene from a different point of view, to write the same scene instead of in third person, in first person present tense. And it changes my own feeling as an author. So these are really powerful and wonderful and magical tools that we can really experiment with.
It is. I love what you're saying there about changing things up and experimenting and trying things, because it's bizarre, isn't it, how just by swapping such a simple thing, you can tap into a scene in such a new way, and it releases either inner dialogue from the character, or even perhaps a plot point from within that if you hadn't had that experimentation and you hadn't swapped around and just played with it, you never would have discovered this little magical moment that is going to really catapult the story. So for yourself, how do you choose which point of view that you're going to write in with your novels, or have you found actually that's been quite an organic process and the book has spoken to you?
It's definitely been experimentation for me. There's this concept of design thinking in which, you want to form hypotheses and then test them. And so for me, it was really just trying them out and seeing how they feel. And I think that experimentation doesn't have to be one and done. I still, imagine that I will continue to experiment with point of view depending on the project. It's not only dependent on the author, but it's dependent on what are you trying to achieve? What is that story intended to do? And to therefore use point of view as a tool. And we haven't even touched on the amazing aspects, that are covered in the chapter around deep point of view. And that idea to really think and to speak and to write deeply in the point of view of a character to create that connection with the reader. Because ultimately, we all want to touch hearts and minds, and here's a way to do so.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put. Yes. I wonder if anyone else wants to speak to this a little bit, your own experiences of, do you also experiment with point of view depending on the story? Does it come to you when you have the story idea, or do you find that you gravitate to a familiar point of view that you use quite regularly? I tend to gravitate always to close third and first, but I don't know if anybody else does or not. Heather, what about you? Do you choose?
Well, it's actually funny. When I first started, so I'm in the process of working on a novel right now with my own book coach. And when she first read the first chapter, she was like, I like it, but have you tried first person? And, it was that immediate that she recognized something about the closeness. And when I started experimenting with that on the particular work that I'm doing now, something changed. And I love the idea of what Carol was just saying about experimentation, because I've been so set in third person, the idea of third person. It was just, what other books in this particular genre are written like for this particular audience. And then when I tried on first person, everything opened up. So I think it can almost feel organic, but then I love the idea of experimenting, because you don't know how the next point of view might feel if you just put it on for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Very intuitive of your coach. And another one of the benefits of working with a coach is that they can help you see these things. Anybody else? Do you have anybody have a different way? Susanne?
Interestingly enough, almost always the point of view that I need to use sort of just jumps out at me, so that I get stuck in it. And for instance, most my young adult books are all in first person. But there have been a couple of instances where I've started in first person and realized that I couldn't get that view that I needed, that I needed to get out of that character's head in order to show the reader what I really needed to show them. So it's sort of the opposite of what Heather was saying. And point of view is very subtle and very, there's also this question of retrospective, where does the narrator stand in time? Where are you, as you start out, are you going through it in a first person present tense is the most intense. You're going along with them and you don't, like, your character doesn't know what's coming next. But then you can also have somebody looking back and being in the past tense. And so that they got there, but you don't know how. It's really a fascinating subject. And Carol, it was really great, everything you said about it, for sure.
Yeah, I know it's funny, isn't it? It's so the narrator as well, that idea of that sort of how distant or close the narrator is, as opposed to the who's not necessarily the protagonist. It's so deep, isn't it? You could go so far with it. Jo, you have taught and coached many people over the years. Do you notice that the students you work with, perhaps most people gravitate towards a certain point of view, or have you noticed that there's a whole mix across the board?
Yeah, I think people sort of subconsciously choose something. Usually it's third person, and often it's first person. And usually they get halfway through their book, or 3/4 of the way through, or several drafts into their book, and then decide, oh, we need to completely change our point of view and rewrite the book from scratch, which I have also done. So clearly I need that chapter on point of view. But I think people find their way to point of view. So I love it, the idea of experimenting and practicing with point of view and seeing what feels good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you know, I remember one of my old writing teachers telling me about a friend of hers who had been writing the same book for 7 years at that point, and then decided she needed to change the point of view by then. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, imagine you get 7 years in and then you suddenly decide you've got to change the whole thing again. And now I've discovered that actually is quite normal. Lots of people do that, which was I don't know, it was just quite eye-opening to me that it can take that long to write, not well, I guess take that long to write the book, and then still have quite a big revision change to make. That's not a small thing to do, is it? Jo, you have a great chapter on scene structure, and this is something I love. When I discovered scene structure, it just changed everything from my writing. It just gave me not the platform, that's the wrong word. It gave me the guidelines that I needed to know that my scene was going to have a function and sort of earn its place in the book. It's one of the things I wish I'd taken more notice of when I first started. But I wonder if you could give us just a quick outline of scene structure as you teach it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slide if you want to, if I'm able to share. I think one of the things about structure in general is, there's a lot of jargon around structure. There's a lot of like terms that we feel like we need to know before we start writing, right? And one of the things I just want to affirm in anyone who's working on a book right now is that this stuff. Like if you've read a book or seen a film or heard a story from a friend or told a story of your own, like this is in you. It's in all of us because we are all raised in the water of story. And scene structure and story structure in general is just a way to describe the pieces of how we communicate on a daily basis, right? So I can share these 6 little things, 6 kind of pieces of plot of scene structure that I talk about in my chapter. And I have a book called The Right Structure where I share these things in more detail. But again, like this is in everything that we do. This is in every story you've ever told. So it doesn't need to be complicated, right? This stuff. So the idea with exposition, there's six elements of plot, 6 elements of structure. Exposition is basically what's normal. Normal world. You're introducing your readers to the characters of your world, the world building, and kind of setting some things up that is going to happen. Then you have the inciting incident where something happens, potentially something life-changing in a story, or if you're writing a specific scene, just something that maybe goes wrong or maybe goes right, but it begins the action of the story. And then you have the rising action. I also call this the progressive complications, where things just get more complicated. Maybe they're getting better, maybe they're getting worse, but they're getting more complicated for the characters in the scene. And then you have the dilemma. The goal of the rising action is to bring the character to a choice, right? And if there's anything that I think we miss when we're writing scenes and when we're writing stories, it's this moment, right? Where the character is stuck in the middle of a choice and they have to choose between 2 really hard things, right? So some examples would be like, do I watch my friend be killed, or do I save them and risk my own life, right? That would be a scene in a story that maybe we've seen many times in stories, and it's an impossible choice. It's a dilemma, and we need to incorporate these into our scenes. And then you have a climax. So the climax rises directly from from the character's choice, and it's the moment of highest action in a story and in a scene. And then the denouement, which is just basically the new normal, what normal looks like after going through all of that. And I think, one of the things I talk a lot about in the book or in the chapter is like, go find a favorite story of yours and look at a scene and see if you can find these elements, and you will find them, or think about a story that you tell in your life, maybe how you met your spouse, or some event that happened to you, and you can find these moments in the stories that you tell because they're everywhere, right? And our job as writers is just to emphasize the parts that are really good, kind of use these tools to tell great stories. And yeah, That's all.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said about how the dilemma is the piece that you've noticed most people miss out. And that's certainly what I notice in my students as well, that is the thing that they miss out. They have this lovely, beautiful scene and got some great characters, and we've maybe got some beautiful description, and it leads up to something, but the something never quite happens. And it's so the dilemma never quite, and so then it's hard then to give the forward momentum to move on to the next scene if nothing is kind of decided or solidified at the end of the first scene that you're writing. I'm glad I'm not alone in noticing that. So that's good. But it's so vital. It's so vital. I think it's that I hear the climax that you've described. It's also, I've heard it described as the conflict, or the choice, that is where, or the choice is where the conflict comes in, isn't it? And so if you don't have that dilemma, if you don't have that choice, then you don't have the conflict that you need to drive things forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, learning so much of this stuff came out of my own failures with my writing, and writing a memoir and reading it and thinking, wow, this is kind of good, but maybe reads a little bit like a journal entry, and mostly doesn't work as a book. And then having to go in and really figure out what makes stories work. What is it that actually makes it feel like our favorite books that we have all loved and have changed our lives? And I think the dilemma was the biggest change for me, is just this one turning point, where something changes in the scene, that brings everything together. So it's an important thing to focus on.
Yeah. And so in part and parcel of making those scenes so effective is not only having that structure to them, but Heather, I think what your chapter does is help us really add texture to that, really add emotion to the scenes that we're writing. And your chapter is about show and tell, not show, don't tell. So I wonder if you could speak to us a little bit about that, and in particular, if you're happy to, an experiment by Paul Zak.
So my degree is in science. So whenever I come to story and all of that, I always think, what's the science behind what's really going on here? What do we know about storytelling? So I've taken so many deep dives into all of the research around that. And there's this incredible scientist. He's actually a neuroeconomist of all things. His name is Paul Zak, and he's the guy who discovered the hormone oxytocin. Actually, not discovered it, but he discovered what it does. Anyway, that's for another day. But he wanted to understand how people get involved in stories, what makes them involved, and not only what makes them involved, but what makes them motivated to act after they have partaken of a story. So he devised a clever experiment where he recorded 2 videos. And they were based off of a story, a father and a son, and the son is about 5 years old, and the son has cancer and is dying. It's a true story. And the first video, it's just a short clip where the father and son, the son is bald because he's had chemo, and the father and son are at the zoo. So there is evidence that the son has cancer, but it's a little vignette. They're at the zoo, they're laughing, they're looking at, all of the animals, and then it ends. And the second video, they show the father and son in the hospital. And the father, they're just showing clips of the father and son, but the father is narrating the tale. And he starts to explain in his narration that it's very hard for him to find joy in the moments with his son, knowing that his son will be dead in 6 months. And so he took these 2, and these were 2-minute videos. They were tiny, short little things. And he showed them to 2 groups of people. And then afterwards, he measured their emotions via their hormones. So he looked for 2 hormones, cortisol, which is all about distress and focus, and oxytocin, which is all about empathy and trust. And he measured those from the blood of both groups. And in the first group, who watched the vignette where it was, clear that the son had cancer, but there was no narration of that, they felt they had no release of oxytocin or cortisol, and so they felt nothing. And in the second group, where the father narrated why it mattered, not just seeing that the son had cancer, but what it meant, what the story was actually supposed to be about, him trying to find joy in these moments. Well, in that case, it was completely different. This group of people, they had high levels of oxytocin and cortisol, so high levels of distress, focus, empathy. And then he went on to say, okay, now which group of people are more likely to act, to like donate money based on that? And so, of course, as a writer, I'm sitting here thinking, well, which type of book then, if a book would make you feel distress and empathy, right, you would be motivated to buy that book or buy the sequel or buy the next novel, right? And to me, this was an incredible finding because it shows that it's not the external sword fights and all of that external stuff that brings us in. It's telling us why it matters. It's the internal stuff. There were no sword fights or chase scenes in either story. But in the second story, there was a focus on why it matters, what it meant, context, all of that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I think it's such a beautiful experiment. It just exemplifies it so perfectly. I'm really glad you brought it to the chapter. And something I say to my students a lot, as long as you are bringing your reader into your character's mind and taking them through the thought process and how they're feeling about something, your reader will follow them pretty much anywhere, as long as they can understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that really exemplifies then why it's not show, don't tell, but we need to do a show and tell. And I think if I've understood you correctly in the chapter, the showing is the sort of external part of it, like we see in that first video. We see them at the zoo, but then the telling is the internal, which I just think is a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and so many writers that I've worked with, they think because they hear show don't tell and they say, oh, well, that means I need to show them fall to their knees and cry and this and that, and that's supposed to mean something to us. So they give us all the external, they describe things, they show body language, they provide all those dialogue, but then they never take us to the internal world of the protagonist so that it means anything to us. And that's where I think a lot of writers really need to bring in that show and tell. Because once you've put the external world on the page, then you have to bring it to the internal world of the protagonist and give us context and memory and feelings and thoughts and dilemmas and what the protagonist is struggling with in their world while they make decisions, while they experience the plot.
Yes. Honestly, when I discovered all of this and saw this new way of seeing it, it was mind-blowing for me. I loved it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because of course we can, as writers, we sit in our room and we're either handwriting as I do or we're typing away, and that element of it is, for most people anyway, not everybody, but for most people, that is the very solitary part of being a writer. But we need to stay close to the fire, as one of my mentors used to say, and that being other writers and being within a community of writers. And Linda, your chapter, I think, really helps us find those communities, because they come in all different shapes and sizes now. It may have been at one stage, if you didn't have someone local to you, you couldn't get involved with them, but your chapter shows us that that's not the case anymore.
That's right. It's something wonderful about Zoom. Yes. I find community, whatever words you want to use, and you just said something about sitting around the fire. I mean, that's a wonderful feel to it. If you can bring yourself around that campfire of telling stories, that's really what a critique group is, except it's not just telling the story. Then you have to accept or hear what they're saying about your piece that you're reading. And there's so many ways of doing a critique group, which I pointed out in the chapter. Personally, I like the in-person group, sitting around the campfire or sitting around somebody's dining room table, or my best, actually, if any of you know, you should know the Algonquin the writers, the Algonquin writers. I actually met with a group of writers in the Algonquin room. We had our own roundtable, and it was fun. It was wonderful channeling Dorothy Parker and the others. But when you are in person, you get to see everyone's expression. And what I try to bring out in the chapter is you can give your feeling about someone's writing in so many ways of expressing it, but your face will really show that expression. You can, of course, you always want to give them the positives before any, I'm not going to call it negatives, before any critique. And the critique should be specific to their story, not what you think they're writing, but what they are writing. So whether you're in person or on Zoom, where you can look at each other's faces, I really find that those are the best ways. I've done other groups that were online, where I never met the people. And
yeah, I think you're mentioning that it was done by email, I think.
Well, this was back in 2006, 7. I found this group online called thenextbigwriter.com. They might still be there, and for some people it's wonderful. And that was my intro, really. And you would submit pages and people would read it. And then on this specific website, we would hand back our critiques. I found that to be very cold. I didn't know the people. I didn't develop a relationship with anybody. Because when you're in person, in Zoom or physically in person, you get to talk about the chapter, the scene, the character. Yes, you might, in my group, we read for a maximum of 10 minutes and then we discuss. So you get to know each other and it becomes much more personal, and you get invested in each other's stories, in each other's characters. I feel that the critique is much deeper than it would be when you don't know each other and you're just reading words. And I've heard from other people, I have never done it this way, but I have heard from people that they would share pages and they would get emails. You could have 10 people in your group, and so you're going to get 5, 6 pages, whatever. Well, that's a lot of reading time that you are taking away from your own work and life. So if that works for you, that's fine. It doesn't work for me. I want to hear the person read their pages, and especially hear myself, because when I read my pages to the group, I pick up things, that I want to change, that I missed. And it's wonderful to hear back from them. And you know what? Depends on how many people you have in your group, 6, 7, 8. You can get 6, 7, 8 different opinions.
Yes, and that's something that you do pick up in the chapter, which is really useful, just kind of for people to just acknowledge that and know that, and not be wary of it, but just that can be part of the process as well.
Yes, and I think as a new writer, I know what happened to me as a new writer. I had so little confidence in my own writing that I was taking what everybody was saying. And that, oh my gosh, that can wreck a chapter because you have so many different ideas coming in. So you have to develop a thick skin and listen to all the critiques. And that's another part of understanding who your critique partners are. You get to know them and how they critique also. And you listen and digest it rather than arguing. Don't get your back up. Don't say, I meant this, you didn't get it. Listen, digest it, and then give it a day or two, and then accept or throw it out.
Yeah, I have to say that's exactly what it's like for me working with my coach. I go and look at all her notes, then I close it down, cry, then get myself together and go and look at it again, and then kind of do the work that I need to do. Carol, you've got your hand up. Oh,
unmute.
I just want to corroborate what Linda is saying about the power of the in-person group. So I thought I was writing for myself until I joined an in-person group where we read our work aloud. And I read a scene in which my character wakes in the hospital after a life-changing accident. Seeing the expression and the emotion on the writers' faces. In fact, I was able to bring this table of writers to tears, made me realize that I should be on the path to publication, that I could move others, and that I wasn't just writing for myself.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
Yeah, beautiful points. Yeah.
It works both. It works all different ways. So when I was writing my first book, I could see in the faces and from their expressions, they didn't like my protagonist. And of course, I got defensive and I'm saying, well, you don't have to like the protagonist, but blah, 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 all that. And the more I listened, I understood why. And I did have to soften her. So it was helpful in that way. But just as you said, Carol, you could see their tears. I have this in the chapter and I just have to bring it out. I was writing, and I don't write sex scenes. I don't write them in my books, but one book out of the 3 has a sex scene in it. And I happened to be reading that chapter aloud while at the Algonquin. I was reading quietly. There are people in the room, but not right by our table. But all of a sudden there was a hush in the room. And I knew I nailed that scene.
Love it.
So when you read aloud, you get a lot of feedback from the people you're reading to, and you see it in their expressions and not only their words. And I think it's a tremendous help. No, it doesn't work for everybody. There are people who only want to work maybe with one other writing partner, which is perfect. I mean, it's still somebody, you have a community of 2. And some people, one woman told me she couldn't deal with all the suggestions. She only wanted to work with her editor. So whatever works for you. But even if you're not working in a critique group, I really believe we need our community. We need somebody to feed off of.
Yay. Meredith, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, I totally agree with the benefit of the in-person group, but there is also, I think, some benefit to doing it over Zoom or the internet or whatever. And Linda knows, because you're in the Women's Fiction Writers Association as well. My WFWA critique group is, fantastic. And because it's small and we're all writing in sort of the same subgenre. So there are certain conventions that we kind of all understand. I mean, in-person groups are great, but if you're not in a city, like I'm in the DC exurbs here. If you're not in a city, you can't, you're in a critique group with poets, memoirists, all kinds of different genres. And there's some benefit to finding a critique group that is in your niche, so that you can kind of all be speaking the same language about like what the genre conventions are. And, you can all kind of help each other and stuff.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I love my group. Every week I'm looking forward to their chapters.
Are you on Zoom with the group, or, I mean, can you see each other?
Yeah, we do meet over Zoom.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's still an in-person kind of feeling because you get to know each other. But I do bring out what you're saying in the chapter also. I think it's really important to find a group, a homogeneous group, meaning genre, or, you should be all, I mean, you don't all have to be romance writers, but if you can find a group of romance writers, you will help each other a lot more than being in a mixture.
Yeah. Once upon a time, HarperCollins had this website called Autonomy, where people could post chapters and get critiques from strangers. And it was an interesting community, but yeah, it still felt very sort of impersonal. And you got to see a lot of different opinions, because of course everybody has their own perspective, and it was all over the world, people reading your stuff and giving you different opinions. So it was interesting. I think the critique group is far more successful as a method for getting that feedback.
Yeah.
Susanne, you've got your hand up.
Just briefly, I have a critique group, sort of slight horror story, but it isn't really, which is, I love my community of writers, but writing historical fiction is there are different genres within that. But I remember in a local critique group where somebody who was writing, quote unquote, literary fiction challenged me one day in the group saying, why do you even bother writing historical fiction? And I'm like, well, it's because it's what I write. And, when you're not going to get useful critique from somebody like that. So I was just reinforcing that it's very useful. It's especially useful to have people who are working in the same or adjacent genres, because you do have that connection. You understand what the genre demands of you as a writer.
Right.
Yeah. And then that way you're kind of all speaking the same language, and there's shorthands for, if you are writing a specific type of historical fiction, then you all understand what each other is aiming for and what each other's audience is looking for as well. Heather.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo what Susanne said in one way. When I was working my first critique group ever, when I was very nervous about anything that I would write, it was a local group, because it was the only thing that was like before Zoom was a thing. I didn't know to go online and look for groups. But I remember the group that I worked with, I was writing a character in the LGBTQ community, and they were not supportive of that. So I think not only genre, but we have to get into groups who have, of writers who have the same worldviews as we have in many ways, that are going to be accepting of the stories we tell. Otherwise, their feedback might not really be helpful to us. So it's, for me, it's less about genre when I'm thinking about who's reading my book, and more about, are they going to be accepting of the stories that I'm telling?
Yeah,
I have a similar story on the Autonomy website. Of course, my character is one of them, is an immigrant and maintains the language that she grew up with, even after she's moved to America. And, I had a commenter be like, why is she refusing to learn English? Well, she spoke English just fine. She just chose to speak Gaelic at home. And, and when you get feedback like that, it's a little bit of, I think that says more about you than it does about my story. But yeah, there's always that possibility. And that's where, like you guys said, you have to just kind of absorb it and think about it and, take it or leave it, depending on.
And the more you're with those people, you get to understand who's who and where it's coming from. Yeah. Also,
I think a wonderful part about your chapter, though, Linda, is that you also include a section on, how to participate in a group, and that it's not just one-sided, that you're receiving the critique, but also you are part of it and you are giving it as well. And I think that's a really important part of your chapter is, okay, how do you participate in an effective way for the other people in your group as well? Yeah.
Yes, and it's all about being kind. Helpful but kind. You've got to be kind with what you're going to say. I mean, even if you disagree or your political viewpoints are different, you can still be in the same group if you focus on the writing and what that scene is saying, and get rid of the other stuff and just focus and be nice, because we're all very vulnerable.
So true. So true. Grace, have you been part of a critique group at all, or ever in the past or now?
I have been with my beta readers for my novel. I was not with my first 3 books. They were in the areas of education, as I think I mentioned. So there were juries who read them and gave me feedback and said, it needs this or it needs that. And I did find that very helpful. I also found it frustrating, though. So my 3rd book is called Battling the Hamster Wheel, Struggles with High School Reform. And I thought I was done, and I needed it to be done because I was on to the next project. And at the very end, they said, this would really be good if you had a study guide. And I was like, oh no, it's done. Please don't ask me to do one more thing. But I would say that the study guide was exactly what the book needed. It was the type of thing that then propelled my own work. School systems bought the book, then school systems wanted me to come in and facilitate the work. So I think one of the powerful things about getting feedback, whether it's through a critique group or through some sort of juried process, is to really listen, as Linda said, even if you don't want, if your initial reaction is, no, I'm done, stop, to realize the benefit to the story, to the work, and to your own life as an author is critical. With my own novel, I was part of a critique group, but I waited very, very late in the process. The book was very much done, in my opinion. In truth, if I'm really honest, I just wanted them to tell me how much they loved it. And what was powerful about it, and you'll always see this quilt behind me, there's a scene in my novel, The Eaves, where the characters leave their mark on the world by dipping their hand in paint and leaving it on the wall of a barn. And my critique group loved that chapter. They all dipped their hands in paint. They wrote a quote from the book underneath it. And when we sat down to tear apart my book, they wrapped me in the quilt, which was absolutely lovely. In the back of the quilt is all books. So it's like the perfect critique group love fest, except they said, your character's not very likable. Chapter 3, I was only really interested in your book at chapter 3. So could you make that chapter 1? And you allude to the guy in chapter 3 who never shows up again. And he really, really needs to come into the book. And that was the one I probably fought the most. Jessica, the main character, gives up a son for adoption. I thought it was super important for people to know that that was part of her story, but I did not think it was all important for him to come back. But they were insistent, and I'm so glad he came back into the story. So I think that I don't have a thick skin, and that's something Linda has really helped me with. I'm currently working on book 2. I'm writing a chapter on working with publishers. Even if Stephanie was still here, I would say it has been more than a journey and learning experience on this book to work with publishers. And Linda has really helped me realize the benefit of critique groups and having writing partners. So I wrote, my chapter for book 2. Yesterday, I tore it apart. It had more red ink on it than anything else. I fixed all those things I thought were wrong, and I sent it to Linda and to Mary Helen Sheriff and said, here's where I think the holes are. It's a little shorter than I want it to be. And then with those really important questions, I think that's something Linda also helped me learn. I have questions going into my critique group. Does it make sense? Does it make sense to be in this book at all? Is it engaging? Is it going to propel readers to action? So I think it's also really helpful when you go into a critique group of knowing what the writer wants from the critique group. And that's something that I've had to hone over my writing process.
Mm-hmm. Such a good point. Yeah, going in knowing what feedback you want. Otherwise, it's fair game, and you might not get the critique that you're looking for that would be helpful to you at that time. I'm conscious that we're sort of winding up. We're getting towards the end of our time. Is there a question that I haven't asked that somebody would like to ask, or something about their chapter that they would like to mention that I haven't asked about? Or have we covered it all? Yay. Okay, good. Grace, we should let people know today is launch day. People can go and buy the book. It's out there in all the places. Where can they buy it? What's the best way to get it?
Well, we're having a little problem with the print version at the moment. It is available digitally. I'm sure by the end of the day, the print version will be all fixed on all of the sites. You can go to the one that's easiest to remember is to just probably go to launchpadcountdown.com. And that will connect you to multiple sites where you can buy the book. Barnes & Noble has everything perfectly done at the moment, both the digital version and the print version.
Yay, so brilliant. So, woo, launch day. I've got my balloons, I've got my bow. It's all exciting. Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us today. And I know that our listeners are going to love the book when they read it, and it's really, really going to help them. So thank you, everybody, for being with me. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yay, brilliant. I think